So the Final Fantasy Tactics remake, which I beat this week, is probably one of the best games that I've played this year without exaggeration. And I mean, genuinely, it's hard to review a game that is so old and yet still so good because it really makes you wonder, like, what is going on with modern day video games? Like, I first played this game a very, very long time ago. Like, I was a kid, I was like a teenager. The last time I played it, I realized, I really did the math in my head, and that was back in around 2012 when I was at university, and basically, like, a friend let me play it on his PSP. Back when the PSP was a thing. And now it's come out for your PC, and I mean, there's not necessarily a ton of changes. They've made a few small changes. They've made some quality of life changes that make it a little bit easier. In particular, they've added an auto battling feature, which, I mean, I'm always a little bit wary of sort of incorporating those, especially into old school RPGs, if only because it tends to trivialize the fact that really the whole point of the game, most of the game, is sitting around and clicking stuff in menus, right? So while it is a bit tedious, and it's the reason why RPGs, classical style RPGs, are not really made as much anymore, at the same time, it's like, well, that's half the game. Half the game is clicking around in menus, and if you just automate that whole thing, it just takes away a good chunk of the gameplay. Yes, it also removes some of the tedium, but it also removes some of what you're actually playing, what makes the game good. And it's also funny because the auto battling thing that they added is kind of weird. It doesn't let you do all of your characters at once. You kind of have to tell individual characters that you want them to auto battle, and it's a little more finicky than it feels like it should be. So, not ideal, but, fine, great. It works really well, especially when you're trying to grind. Final Fantasy Tactics is one of those games where it's really just a timeless game. It's really freaking good. The plot is really good. Obviously, it's a little bit wordy, it's a little bit dense, it's a little bit hard to get through, especially if it's your first time. But it's really good. It ends up being really good by the end. It's really, the juice is worth the squeeze. The combat is good. The graphics have been updated. I think a huge, huge thing that they've added is dialogues. They've fully voiced all of the cutscenes. They've given all the characters voices, which also really, really adds a ton to this plot because, again, it is a plot that's very heavy on writing, very heavy on talking. And the game is also very difficult in the old school way. There's a lot of, old school video games are more difficult discourse. And some of that is not that they were difficult. It's actually just that they were poorly designed or that, the gameplay was, just sort of obtuse or, whatever, right? This is an example of a game where it is genuinely quite difficult, and it will require that if you're going to play the game on standard difficulty, you're probably going to have to do a bunch of grinding. You're probably going to have to do a bit of theory crafting to sort of, figure out how to get the exact right items and the exact right character setups and so on for whatever your specific fight is that you're going into. And it's very interesting also, in particular, I think that I didn't really notice this when I was a kid, but coming at it from the eye of a game designer now, it's very clear how often in this game they would give you specific fights that were really designed to test whether or not you knew a particular mechanic. So that might be like, okay, this fight is all undead, so you have to know how to handle undead. Or, this fight is all, using this particular status ailment, so you have to have the right kinds of stuff to protect against that, or you need to just, figure out how to get around it, or have the right spells to get around it. There's a lot of stuff like that, which I really like. I will say also that there are parts of it that I dislike a little bit in particular. In general, by the end of the game, some of the boss fights just turn into hey, turn everyone into ninjas because this has super high DPS output, and then just have them, all attack the boss really quickly so you can try and knock the boss out before you're all dead. That does kind of become a bit of a strategy by the end, is basically just rushing, with the one boss or whatever with your fastest and strongest characters. And I mean, yeah, okay, maybe you don't like that style of gameplay, whatever. But in general, I would say that it still, they really managed to balance that. They really managed to balance, sort of the boss attack style fights with the more typical fights, and it works out really well. And I genuinely wish that they made more games like this. I was literally sitting down, playing the game, and I was like, man, I wish that they would actually just make more Final Fantasy Tactics games. I wish that they would make more of these style of games in general. I wish that they would make more Final Fantasy games. I wish that they would make more games that are plot heavy like this. You know, there's just so many things in this that are things that used to be somewhat normal in terms of how video games are made, which nowadays are just, you know, not. I think that part of the, you know, the premise of the indie game explosion is that we'd have a lot more of these, you know, sort of like cool, lower budget games that are not necessarily the kinds of like high graphical fidelity stuff that you see in AAA. And that sort of became true, but I would also say that a lot of indie games don't have really much, you know, emphasis on plot or writing in the same way. You know, it's not like it's usually being made by somebody who has good writing skills. It's usually being made by like a small team that has like maybe, you know, an engineer, a designer, and an artist and nothing else. And you don't really have necessarily people who can write, you know, complex plots, right? And genuinely also, I miss just the setting. So the Final Fantasy Tactics series is set in Ivalice, which is the same setting which they later used for things like Vagrant Story and also Final Fantasy XII. And I miss the setting. It's a very good setting. I love it a lot. It's actually one of my favorite settings just in Final Fantasy in general. I'd say that certainly Final Fantasy XII is not my favorite Final Fantasy, but it gets a huge, huge bump up because it's set in that same setting. I would generally say that things like Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy VII are sort of my standout favorites in the series. I certainly really love the first Final Fantasy. But oh my god, like 12 has a special place in my heart, specifically because the art style, the setting is so good. And it's obviously a younger, you know, sort of different version of Ivalice that we see in Final Fantasy Tactics. But it's still Ivalice. I love the setting. It's great. I wish that we had more of it. So, I mean, there's not really too much to say. I think you should just go buy this video game. It's great. Like, you can play the original version as well. It does come with both the original version and the updated version. So if you're a purist who just really wants to play the original version, go ahead. But I would play the updated version. I think that it's a rare example of something where they did it right with a remake. They enhanced the graphics a little bit. They did not change anything too significantly. They did not really, you know, mess with anything. It's really the same core game, and it's still really good after all of these years. And it just makes me wonder why we can't do more of this. You know, we don't have the technology. We've forgotten the old magic. The old ways are just forbidden to us modern weirdos. Anyway, that's all for today's video. As always, I hope you enjoy it. Don't hesitate to like, comment, subscribe, smash the notification bell. Direct your hate comments down below, and I will see you all next time.